There is a moment, quiet, unremarkable on the surface, where a man picks up a pen and signs his name to a document he has not read. He is not careless. He is not stupid. He is simply a man who has just lost everything he knew in the space of a few weeks: his title, his brother, his country, his identity, his income, his purpose, and the one person still standing beside him has just placed a piece of paper in front of him and told him it is routine, standard, nothing to worry about. So he signs. And in that single movement of pen across page, buried inside a clause on page 14 of a prenuptial amendment dated 2020, he gives away something he will not fully understand he has lost until it is far too late to recover it. His name, his brand, his children's primary home, his right to tell his own story, his financial future. All of it quietly, legally, irrevocably transferred. Tom Bauer has found it. All of it. And what he is now saying publicly should make every person who ever believed in this love story stop cold. This is not tabloid gossip. This is a former barrister and BBC investigative journalist with 40 years of experience dismantling powerful people who believed they were untouchable. And what Bauer found inside Harry and Meghan's marriage is, by his own description, the most significant discovery of his entire career. The story you are about to hear has never been fully told. It begins not with a wedding, not with a prince, but with a woman who understood long before Harry ever entered the picture that the person who controls the document controls the outcome. To understand what Harry signed, you first have to understand who Harry was before he signed it. Not the Harry of official photographs and charity galas. Not the polished, uniformed prince performing purpose for cameras. The Harry underneath all of that, the one almost no one was allowed to see. He was 12 years old when his mother died. 12 years old, standing outside a church in a suit that was too formal for a child, walking behind a coffin in front of the entire world, and the institution he had been born into, the institution that was supposed to be his family, did not allow him to grieve. He was trained, with a precision that bordered on cruelty, to perform composure. To hold it together in public. To be the prince first and the boy never. What that does to a person does not simply fade with time. It goes underground. It shapes everything, every relationship, every attachment, every desperate reaching toward anyone who seemed to offer genuine warmth in a world that had always prioritized image over truth. By the time Meghan Markle entered his life in 2016, Harry was not a man in full possession of himself. He was a man carrying 3 decades of suppressed grief, an identity built entirely on a role he had not chosen, and a longing for connection so deep that the people closest to him struggled to describe it in ordinary language. One person who knew him well during this period told Bauer it was less like watching a man fall in love and more like watching someone finally believe, for the first time in his adult life, that he was worth loving. That is the Harry who met Meghan. That is the Harry she had to understand, and according to Bauer's 80 sources, she understood him with devastating precision from the very beginning. Meghan Markle was 35 years old when they met. She was disciplined, strategic, and had already built a career out of turning limited resources into maximum leverage. She had navigated Hollywood, one of the most brutal environments on earth for a mixed-race woman without generational connections, and she had done it by being, in the words of multiple people who worked with her, several moves ahead of the room at all times. What almost nobody has reported is that within weeks of beginning her relationship with Harry, not months, not after the relationship deepened, but within weeks, she hired Sunshine Sachs. Sunshine Sachs is not a firm you hire because you are excited about a new romance. They do not manage celebrity happiness. They manage celebrity crises. They are known specifically for handling high-stakes separations. They managed Katie Holmes when she left Tom Cruise. When a woman hires that firm at the very beginning of a new relationship with a prince, she is not thinking about the honeymoon. She is building a structure that will survive whatever comes after. Harry knew none of this. He was, by every account Bauer gathered, completely and genuinely certain he had found the person who saw him, not the title, not the uniform, not the institution, but him. The broken, searching, profoundly lonely man underneath all of it. That certainty was the lever. And it had been identified and used before. Before Harry, there was Trevor Engelson. Most people who follow this story barely remember the name. Trevor was a Hollywood television producer, energetic, well-liked, genuinely fond of Meghan, who married her in Jamaica in 2011, surrounded by their closest friends. 2 years later, she filed for divorce citing irreconcilable differences. The whole thing was handled quietly, efficiently, and was over so fast it barely registered as news. But what happened inside that settlement is the key that unlocks everything that came later. When Meghan sat down with her legal team to negotiate the split, the lawyers on Trevor's side were not prepared for what they encountered. She had not arrived with a single attorney and a general sense of her interests. She had arrived with a team. She had read every line of every document before the first meeting. She questioned every clause. She pushed back on every term that did not directly serve her long-term financial independence. And buried inside the final agreement was something that Trevor Engelson would not fully understand until months after the ink was dry. Meghan's team had inserted a clause granting her full ownership of any future earnings derived from projects developed during the marriage, even projects that had not yet generated income at the time of the split. According to people who know Engelson personally, he realized only later that this clause had effectively cut him out of several projects he had actively helped develop. He described the experience to a close friend, according to Bauer's sources, as opening a door he thought led to one room and finding out it led somewhere else entirely. The lesson Meghan took from that divorce was one she never forgot, and one she carried directly into her next marriage. Protect your earning potential above everything. Build financial structures that belong entirely to you. And always control the document. The same lawyers who handled that settlement were consulted again when the 2020 prenuptial amendment was drafted. They had already seen her operate. They knew exactly what she prioritized. And they built a clause that reflected, with devastating precision, the lesson she had been waiting for the right moment to deploy at scale. That moment came in January 2020. And Harry, in that moment, had nothing left to protect himself with. The announcement that Harry and Meghan were stepping back from royal duties landed like a detonation. Within days, Harry had lost his HRH designation in practice, his formal military appointments, his security detail, his institutional income, and perhaps most devastatingly, the last fragile remnant of his relationship with William. Mental health professionals who later analyzed his public statements during this period described it as consistent with acute psychological crisis. He was, by every measure available, shattered. His legal team in the UK was almost entirely consumed by the phone hacking litigation. His California representation was less experienced with the specific implications of prenuptial amendments under state law. It was into this specific window of maximum psychological and legal vulnerability, that the amendment was placed in front of him. It was presented as routine paperwork. A standard update to reflect their new business activities as they transitioned out of royal life. Nothing unusual. Nothing requiring close attention. Harry trusted her completely. So he signed. Signed was an intellectual property clause buried on page 14 of that amendment. And it is worth being precise about what intellectual property actually covers, because the breadth of it is the point. It covers brand names, logos, and trademarks. It covers the rights to stories, books, and media content. It covers the right to profit from a person's own name and likeness. It covers revenue streams connected to any content built around a person's public identity. And this clause did not divide those things equally between husband and wife. According to Bauer's sources, it gave Meghan primary ownership over the Sussex brand, their joint ventures, their media content, and, critically, the revenue connected to Harry's memoir, Spare. It listed her as business manager for all their shared enterprises, which under California law grants her the dominant legal position in any financial dispute that follows. But there is one element of this clause that Bauer himself describes as the real weight of the agreement. It does not simply cover existing ventures. It contains forward-looking language, carefully, deliberately constructed forward-looking language that covers any future project developed using assets, relationships, or platforms that originated during the marriage. What this means in plain terms is this. Even if Harry walked away tomorrow, even if he started entirely from nothing, if that new venture drew in any way on his royal background, his Invictus platform, his public profile as a Sussex, or any relationship formed during the marriage, Meghan would retain a legal claim to a share of it. It is not a divorce clause. It is a financial leash with no expiry date. The name he was born with. the life he actually lived. The story that belongs, in every human sense, to him, could become, in legal terms, largely hers to control. Harry signed it at the worst moment of his life, surrounded by almost no one he could trust, with no independent legal voice telling him to stop. He signed it because she placed it in front of him. And by the time the ink dried, the trap had closed completely. While Harry spent the following years in London courtrooms, weeping openly, arguing with judges, spending money on legal battles his own advisors had warned were financially catastrophic, Meghan was in California, building American Riviera Orchard appeared first. A lifestyle brand filed as a trademark application, registered in her name alone. No reference to Harry anywhere in the documentation. No joint ownership. No shared filing. Then the Lemonade podcast deal, structured with her as sole proprietor. Then The Bench, the family book, established with no financial connection to Harry whatsoever. Every business structure Meghan created during this period told the same story. She was not building a shared future. She was building a personal fortress. Bauer's financial sources described the mechanism used to move money out of jointly held structures into Meghan's solo accounts. Under California law, income directed into a single-member LLC before transferred to a joint account can be argued to remain the separate property of that LLC's sole owner. According to sources who spoke to Bauer, at least 5 such entities were established in Meghan's name alone between 2022 and 2024. Harry's name does not appear in any of them. The $38 million debt figure connected to the Sussex finances is not what it appears to be either. Bauer's sources described a structure where the liabilities appear jointly held on the surface while the actual financial burden attaches disproportionately to Harry's side because under California community property law, courts examine who derived the primary economic benefit from the spending. Harry's UK legal cases, his international travel, his personal projects. If Meghan can demonstrate those expenditures were his rather than theirs, the debt follows him out the door. One financial advisor who spoke to Bauer used a single word to describe the entire spending architecture from 2022 onward: textbook. And then there is the custody dimension. The part that sources close to Harry describe as the most devastating element of all. California family courts establish custody arrangements based primarily on the existing pattern of care at the time of filing. Harry has spent a significant portion of the past 3 years outside California, traveling to London for court cases, attending Invictus events internationally. Meghan has remained in Montecito, present in the children's daily lives. The primary caregiver in practical, documented, legal terms. When divorce papers are filed, her legal team will submit Harry's absence record as evidence. The courtroom argument will not require imagination. It will require a calendar. In January 2026, Meghan rehired Sunshine Sachs. People who understand how high-profile divorce strategy actually works described the move to Bauer in identical terms. You do not bring in a crisis management firm that specializes in separations unless the separation is already decided. You bring them in 3 to 6 months before filing, so that by the time the papers are served, the public already has a version of events that positions you as the one who tried, the one who endured, the one who was left with no choice. The story planted in those months becomes the story that sticks. It shapes how the custody battle is framed before a single court document becomes public. It shapes what the audience believes before Harry has said a word. Every move Meghan made from 2022 onward, the solo business filings, the independent ventures, the decision to front all public-facing media, aligns with a single piece of advice Bauer's sources say she received from a senior Hollywood divorce attorney as early as 2020. The most effective way to secure a dominant legal position in a California divorce involving a public figure spouse is to establish yourself as the primary commercial driver of the partnership before any separation occurs. California courts look at who built the business. If one spouse can demonstrate they were the architect, the dealmaker, the creative force, and the public face of the brand, that spouse enters any asset dispute from a position of enormous strength. By the time Bauer's researchers mapped the full timeline, every piece was in place. The trademarks secured. The LLCs registered. The financial flows routed. The narrative being shaped. And Meghan's name appearing first on every official document connected to Archewell, granting her dominant legal authority over decision-making at the exact moment it would matter most. Harry, meanwhile, was in a London courtroom, weeping in front of a judge, spending money his own team had told him he could not afford to spend. Bauer's sources raised a question about this particular period that is difficult to shake. Why did Meghan continue to encourage those UK legal battles even after Harry's lawyers had clearly briefed him on the financial exposure? Under the prenuptial amendment, those legal debts fall on Harry alone once the divorce is filed. She had no reason to stop him. She had every reason to let him keep going. What Bauer ultimately describes is not simply a divorce. It is a complete dismantling. Harry loses the Montecito mansion under asset structures already in place. He loses majority control of Archewell and the Sussex brand under the intellectual property clause he signed without reading. He faces a custody arrangement he is already behind on. And under the forward-looking language on page 14, his right to write another book, launch another venture, or monetize the story of who he actually is could belong, legally, largely to her, for years to come. But here is the part of Bauer's portrait that lands with the most weight. It is not a portrait of a foolish man. It is not a portrait of a weak one. It is a portrait of a completely destroyed one who never stood a chance. Harry entered this marriage already carrying damage that most people cannot fully imagine. He was 12 years old when the world watched him walk behind his mother's coffin. He spent the following 30 years inside an institution that trained him to suppress every honest feeling he had in favor of performance and protocol. The longing for genuine connection that developed inside that environment was not a character flaw. It was an entirely human response to an entirely inhuman upbringing. When Meghan arrived and offered him what felt like the first unconditional warmth he had ever known, he did not fall in love carelessly. He fell in love with the terrifying totality of a man who has been waiting his whole life for someone to actually see him. She saw him. She saw exactly what he needed. And she understood, with a clarity that Bauer's 80 sources describe in consistent, chilling detail, precisely how to use that need to ensure that when the time came, he would sign anything she placed in front of him. Old friends who tried to reach Harry during the marriage described the eerie experience of getting through to him briefly and then watching him pull away again within days, as though something had been said in private that changed his mind. Every person who might have asked him a difficult question was gradually, systematically removed. By the time Megxit happened, Harry had no inner circle left except her. He was alone in a country not his own, financially dependent, psychologically isolated, and carrying a signature on a document he had not read. By the time Harry fully understands the scope of what he gave away, the legal machinery will already be in motion. The clause will have been activated. The assets will have been separated. The narrative shaped by Sunshine Sachs will already be the version of events the world believes. And Harry, the man who gave up his country, his family, his title, and the last remnants of his old self for a love story, will be left holding the wreckage of a plan he never knew existed. This is not a story about a bad marriage. It is a story about what happens when the most vulnerable part of a person, the part that simply wants to be loved, becomes the thing used most deliberately against them. Prince Harry signed his name because he trusted someone completely. In the end, that trust may cost him everything. If this story moved you, share it, because the truth behind closed doors deserves to be heard, even when the people who hold the documents would prefer it stayed buried.